Hey guys, welcome to day 7 of 100 days of code. Now, today we have a whole day dedicated to a really cool project. And what we're going to be building throughout this day is basically Hangman, or the code equivalent of this game. So, the way the game works is you have to guess a word, and for every wrong letter you submit, you end up taking a life away from this little man. And of course, the longer it takes you to get to the word, the more you put your little man in danger. This is what the final completed project is going to look like. We're going to have some really cool ASCII art, like this hangman logo up here, and it's going to ask us to guess a letter. So let's try A. And you can see that's not in the word, so we lose a life, and it starts drawing our little hangman. So let's try another letter, E. There's a lot of E's in there, so we managed to get that. Let's try a T. And I think I know what the word is now, just before my little man is going to die. I think it's beekeeper. There we go, we got it. So if we had lost just one more life, the leg would have been added and we would have lost, but we managed to get there in the end. So this is what the completed game looks like and how it plays out. And you can go over to the final URL and run the code and see it in action if you want to. But just by building this game, we're going to be able to review and test ourselves on a bunch of concepts that we've already covered, like for and while loops, or if and else statements, lists, strings, the range function, modules, and much, much more. So I hope you're as excited as I am to get started on this project. And once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's begin. All right, guys, so before we get started with our project, it's really important that we're all on the same page and we understand how the code is going to work because we know how the game works. So I recommend that if you've never heard of this game, Hangman, then before you continue to just head over to the Wikipedia article on Hangman, and it might be even easier if you select your own language because I know that it has a different name in different languages. Now, if you've never played this game, I also recommend just to go and give it a go online. So I'll link to this address, and if you click on single player untimed, you can see that you have a word that you have to guess, and then you start picking some letters. And if it's right, then it goes in, and if it's wrong, then the hangman gallows start being drawn, and our little man is at risk of being hung. Once you understand how the game works, it's time for us to examine what the logic for our program is going to look like. And to do that, we're going to use flowchart programming. So it's very simple. It just means that we can draw out a flowchart to represent the logic of our game. At this point, I want you to pause the video and have a quick think about how you would program Hangman. Try and come up with a flowchart that represents the logic of this game. Break it down into little steps. What needs to happen first? What needs to happen when the user makes a guess? And what should happen when the guess is incorrect? When should the game end? Pause the video now, take a pencil and a piece of paper, or use draw.io to create your flowchart. So how did that go? Did you break down the problem? It's really important to say that there's no single right answer here, and there's loads of ways that you could have done this. But let me show you my approach, which is how we'll write our program over the next couple of lessons. So this is what it looks like from start to end. And if we zoom in a bit, let's go through this flowchart step by step so we're all on the same page. At the start of the game, the first thing we do is to generate a random word. Let's say in this case, it was the word mouse. Now, the next step is to generate as many blanks as the letters in the word. So we have these blanks to show the user how many letters are in this word that they need to guess. They don't get to see this, but they get to see this. And the next step, they get to guess a letter. So let's say the user in this case guessed the letter O. Well, the next thing we have to check is the guessed letter actually in the word? Well, in this case, O is indeed in mouse. It's the one at the second position. And so we go down this path and we answer yes to that question. So now we get to replace that blank with the letter O. Now the next stage is we have to check, are all the blanks filled? Are all of these blanks removed? Because in that case it means the user has guessed all of the letters correctly. Well, at the moment it's definitely a no because we've only guessed one letter. So then we go all the way back to the beginning and we ask the user to guess another letter. Now at some stage of the game all the letters will be guessed and then we can answer yes to this question, which means it's game over. The user has won because they've guessed all the letters correctly. Now, if we go back to the part where we asked the user to guess a letter, and they guessed a letter, say the letter Z, which doesn't actually exist in this word mouse, well then in this case we go down this right path to answer no, and the user loses a life, which means we start drawing out our hangman figure. Now, depending on whether if they have run out of lives, if the hangman has been drawn completely, then they would go down this path, but at the moment they've only lost one life and this figure is not complete, so the answer is no. And that means we go back to the beginning and we get them to guess the next letter. Now, if at the stage where they've exhausted all of their lives and the hangman figure is complete, well then it's the end of the game and they've basically just lost without having guessed all of the letters in the word. So this is the logic, and you might need to come back to this video a few times if you get stuck along the way, just to review how the program flows, but it might also be worth creating your own flowchart or simply downloading this completed flowchart I have here in the course resources. It's a really useful tool to come back to and refer to as you're writing the code, because this will give you an overview of what you're trying to get your code to do. And hopefully this is going to make it easier for you to complete the upcoming challenges in this project. Once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started. Alright guys, so to get started, head over to the starting Replit file, which you'll be able to find in the course resources. And you should see a pretty much empty file, as well as 3 to-dos for you to complete. All I've got here is a list of 3 words, aardvark, baboon and camel, and we're going to be choosing a random word from that list, and then we're going to ask the user to guess a letter, and then we're going to check if that letter matches one of the letters in the chosen word. So we're basically just tackling the first part of this flowchart up to about here. Once you've completed all 3 to-dos here, you should have something that will function more or less like this. So this is the end result of step 1, and it should ask us to guess a letter. So let me try A, and it shows me that this A matches with the first letter in the word as well as the 4th letter in the word. So I'm pretty sure that the word that it picked randomly was actually aardvark. Essentially, your code is going to loop through each of the letters in the chosen word and then check it against the word that the user entered and report back whether if it matched any of the letters in the word. Now, if you need a hint, then head over to the course resources and you'll see a link that's marked as hint. And once you click on it, it'll take you to this page where it talks about how to use the for loop with a list in Python. Have a read through the section and then go back, try to tackle the to-dos and see if that helps you. Alright, so have a play around with the final version, and once you're ready, go ahead, fork a copy of the starting file for day 7, step 1, and tackle the to-dos one by one. Good luck. Alright, so how did you get on? Now, if you got stuck or you want to see maybe how I did it, then continue watching and I'll go through the solution with you. So first things first, head over to the link and fork your own copy. Once you've done that, we're going to tackle the to-dos one by one in order. The first one asks us to randomly choose a word from the word lists and assign it to a variable called chosen word. So in order to randomly get an item out of the list, we're going to need to import the random module. And once we've got hold of that, then we can say random dot choice. And if we put inside the parentheses the list that we want to randomly choose from, then we should be able to get hold of a single item from this list randomly. And then finally, we're going to assign it to a variable called chosen word. So let's call that chosen word and then set it to equal this result. So that's to do 1 completed. The next to do, we have to ask the user to guess a letter and assign their answer to a variable called guess. And finally, make that guess lowercase. In order to ask the user for anything, we're going to have to create an input. And let's say guess a letter. And then we can assign their answer, which will replace this line of code with a variable called guess. So we'll just set that equal to guess. And finally, we're going to make this guess lowercase, and we do that by writing .lower. Now, step 3 asks us to check if the letter the user guessed, which is this guess variable, is one of the letters in the chosen word. So this randomly chosen word could be any one of these, aardvark, baboon, or camel. And we have to somehow check if this letter, which is stored inside this variable guess, matches any of the letters inside this list of words. So as I mentioned, as a hint, you can have a look at this document from Google for Education, which talks about various things in Python. And the part I wanted to draw your attention to is the for loop, which we covered previously. So we know that we can use the for loop like this to loop through a particular list and get hold of each of the items in the list like this. So in our case, all we have to do is say for letter in chosen word. So this is going to go through this chosen word letter by letter, and each time the loop runs, we'll get hold of one of the letters inside the word. So the first time that letter variable will be equal to A, the next time it'll be equal to R, and so on and so forth. So now inside our for loop, we can check to see if the letter that we're currently looking at is double equals to the letter that the user guessed. And in this case, well, then that means it's a match, right? So we're going to print either match, or in my case, I'm just going to write right, and else, namely if it doesn't match, then we're going to print wrong. That's it. That's all we had to do to complete all 3 to-dos. And now if I run this code, you can see it's going to ask me to guess a letter. So let's put A, and then it goes through this loop line by line to check against this letter that I've guessed. So I'm guessing in this case the chosen word is aardvark. So when the loop is running through the first letter, A and A match, so it says right. Then the next time it's looking at the letter R, A and R does not match, so we get wrong. And it continues until it finds all the matches and all the ones that don't match. Now, if you want to check your code against mine, simply head over to the URL that's listed in the course resources under App Brewery Day 7 Hangman 1 End. And here you'll be able to see all the code that I went through with you just now. Now, if you had any issues understanding how the code worked or how to get to the final solution, and if you're at all confused, I recommend putting the code through Thonny and just clicking on the debug to go through each of the steps one by one. So in this line, we're going to use the random module and get hold of a random item from this list. So in this case, it's picked camel. And now that camel is going to be equal to the variable chosen word. So on the next step, we ask the user to guess a letter. And once we step into that, it's going to print that out into the debug console. And if I put A and hit enter, then guess is now equal to A. And there's our second variable, guess, which is equal to A. Now we fall into our for loop, And if we step into the loop, then you can see that the chosen word is going to be replaced with camel, and letter is going to be replaced with each of the letters in the chosen word one by one. So the first time the loop runs, it's going to be C, and then it checks to see, well, if C is equal to guess, which is A, does that match? No, it doesn't. So it jumps to the else part and it prints out wrong. And then the loop is going to restart from the top, and we're going to go to the next letter in the chosen word, which is A. Now in this case, the letter is A and the guess is A, and so that should match, and so it should print right. And then it basically steps through all of these again and again until we get to the end of the word and we get this printed out. So have a play around with that and the debug console to wrap your head around it, and once you're confident that you know what's going on, then head over to the next lesson and let's complete step 2. Alright, so now that you've tackled step 1, let's continue building out our project by doing step 2. Again, we have 3 to-dos in the starting file, and what we're going to try and do here is we're going to generate a list with as many of these blanks, which is represented by an underscore string, as there are letters in the chosen word. So for example, if the chosen word was apple with 5 letters, then we should be able to create a list with 5 items and each of them being an underscore. So then in the next stage, we can replace some of the items inside that list with the correct letter if the user guesses it right. So for example, if the word was apple and the user guessed the letter P, then we should be able to loop through each of the letters in the word, and for every letter that it matches, we replace the underscore with the actual letter. So then we end up with a list that looks like this. Finally, you're going to print that out and we should be able to see it in the console. In the starting file, you'll notice I've added a little bit of testing code, which is just a print statement telling us what the chosen word is. And this will make it easier for us to debug and figure out if our code is not doing what we want it to do. So once you've completed all of the to-dos in step 2, then this is what you should get. In this case, the chosen word is baboon. So if I guess the letter B, because I'm cheating and also because I'm trying to test the code, and I hit enter, then you can see that it should print out a list with 6 items in it because there's 6 letters in baboon. And each of the letters which I've guessed correctly in the right are replaced in the list in the correct position. B occurs in the first and the third letter, so that is what's showing up in this list. And everything else is still the underscore because they're blanks and still need to be guessed. Have a play around with the final version of the code, and once you're ready, head back, fork the starting project, and complete the to-dos in order. Now, if you need a hint and you get stuck, be sure to check the course resources for a link that links to, again, a Google for Education page, and have a read through the section on the range function that we learned about in previous lessons. Remind yourself of how it works and then go back to your code and try to tackle it and see if you can get it to do what it needs to. Good luck, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, let's go ahead and run through the solution together. Firstly, I'm going to fork my own copy of the starting file for step 2, and then I'm going to take a look at to-do number 1. So the goal is to create an empty list called display, and for each letter in the chosen word, remember that's a random word from this list, we're going to add an underscore to this list called display. So it tells us that if the word was apple, then display should contain 5 underscores representing each letter the user needs to guess. Let's go ahead and just click run before doing anything first. And this print statement will execute and it'll tell us that the solution is aardvark. This is a 7-letter word. So in this case, we would need to create a list with 7 underscores and 7 items. let's go ahead and create an empty list called display. An empty list is just a set of square brackets with nothing inside. Now, for each letter in the chosen word, we're going to add a underscore to this list. How can we add something for each letter? The simplest way is to simply use a for loop. Now, in this case, we have a choice. We can either use the style of for loop that we used previously down here, which is a way of looping through a list. So we could say for letter in a chosen word. So it's going to run this for as many letters as there are in this word. And for every single letter, we're just simply going to take our list display and add an item to it. And that item is going to be the string underscore. So now if we go ahead and print out our display and see what we get. The solution is baboon, which is 6 letters, and display gets printed with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 underscores inside. Now notice how here we're not actually using this variable letter that gets created. We're looping through every letter in the chosen word, but we're not doing anything with each of the letters. So we can, in fact, just replace it with an underscore. Now, alternatively, we could have created this for loop with a range function as well. And remember that the range function creates a range of numbers from 0 up to a particular number that you specify. So we could have also, instead of looping through the chosen word, used range, and inside here we could have put the length of the chosen word. So then our range would be between 0 and the length of the chosen word. So if it was baboon, then that would be from 0 to 6, but not including 6. Remember, that's how the range operator works. So it would be 0, and then it would be 1, and so on and so forth until it gets to 5. And so that would be a total of 6 loops, adding 6 of these underscores. So given that I've updated this for loop, if we run it again, you can see it's exactly the same. It will create as many underscores in the list as there are letters in the chosen word. So it doesn't actually matter in this case which version you went for. Either this version of the for loop using the range function or the previous one which just looped through the list. It's your choice. They both work the same. So now let's move on to do number 2. Now we have to loop through each position in the chosen word, and if the letter at that position matches the letter the user guessed, then we're going to reveal that letter in the display at that position. So basically we're going to replace the underscore with the letter that the user guessed if they guessed it right. So now this is probably the hardest part of this whole step, because in order to do this, we actually have to change this for loop to one that uses the range function, because we need to get hold of the position when the letter and the guess actually matched. That way we can tap into the list and change only the item at that particular position. So let me show you how the code would look. Instead of saying for letter in chosen word, we would say for position in range, and the range is going to be between 0 and the length of the chosen word. And once we've got that, then the for loop is going to run for as many times as there are letters in the word. And for each of those letters, it's going to give us a number, a position to work with. So the first time it runs it, position is going to be equal to 0, because we'll be looking at the first item in the chosen word, which in this case would be A. And then the next time the loop runs, position becomes 1, and we'll be looking at the second item in the list. Now we no longer have that letter to work with, which is why we get an error here. So how can we get hold of the current letter in the chosen word, given that we know the position? Well, it would be as simple as saying letter equals chosen word, square brackets at the current position. Now we can check to see if the letter is equal to the letter the user guessed. Then we can get hold of our display and get the item at the current position and then set that to equal the letter. And we can get rid of the else statement entirely. So now notice that we're using the length of the chosen word in quite a few places. So if you want to, you can actually simplify the code by simply creating a new variable called word length. And now every time we need to use the word length, we can just refer to that variable, which should make our code a little bit easier to read. Finally, all we have to do for step 3 is just to print our list, which is called display. And then when we run our code, you should be able to see that if the solution was camel, initially our display starts out with 5 blanks because there's 5 letters. And then once we've guessed a letter, then it will replace that letter at the correct position in that display list. So A only matches the second letter, so that second blank gets replaced by this letter. And again, I recommend to review the code if it's at all confusing, or if you didn't manage to get it first time through the Thonny IDE, just to see it step by step and see what's actually happening. We've chosen our random word, which in this case turns out to be camel, and once we get into our display, it starts out as an empty list, but as soon as we calculate the word length, then we can go ahead and loop through the range of numbers from 0 to the length of the word, which is 5, and it will run the code in the for loop, which is just to add the underscore to this list 5 times. And finally, once it's done, it's going to print it out. So this is what we get, 5 blanks for the word camel. Now it asks the user for a guess. So I'm going to guess the letter A, and it enters this final for loop. This is where it's really interesting. So we're going to step into it to see it in more detail. So now the range is a range between 0 and the word length. So the word length is 5. So that range becomes from 0 to 5, not including 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is going to make the for loop run 5 times. The position starts out with 0. And when position is 0, then it's going to go into this next line, line 18, and put 0 here as the position. And then we go into the chosen word, which is camel, and pick out the item at position 0. And so this letter becomes equal to the letter C, because that's the letter at position 0 of the word. So now in our if statement, we check to see if the letter, which is C, is equal to the guess, which is A. Well, in this case, C does not equal A. So we go back to the beginning of the for loop, and we go to the next number in the range, which is now 1. And we're going to repeat this again and again. But in this case, notice that the letter at position 1 of camel is equal to A. So now letter is equal to A and guess is equal to A. So if those two are equal, then this if statement is true, and we end up going inside it to carry out this functionality. Our letter is equal to A, and we're going to look at our list, which is called display, this one, and we're going to replace that second character with the letter that was matching. And it's going to do this again and again until we've looped through 5 times through all of the letters in the chosen word, and finally we print the final version of display with the correct letters replaced. Have a play around with this if you're at all confused, and it might be that you need to look up some stuff on Stack Overflow, or you might need to review some of the lessons that we've done before on things like range functions and for loops, just so that you're really certain that you know what's going on, and only then should you continue to the next step. Take a moment with this, and I'll see you on the next lesson.